So let's review quickly for the quiz that we're about to take right now. Quiz 6.1 to 6.2. The first three questions on the quiz will be on classifying the system given the graphs. And like I've mentioned before, the questions come straight from the homework. So this first part, 1, 2, 3, and 4, that was on classifying. So let me just show you one example. Number 2, it says x minus y equals -4. You look for it over here. There it is. X minus y equals -4. So you're talking about this line right here. And the other one says x plus y equals x plus 4. So you look at y equals x plus 4. And as you can see, it's the same exact line. Okay. So if it is the same exact line and they're asking us to classify it, so the first three questions are on classifying it, not solving it. So if it is the same line, how do we classify that? We classify that as consistent dependent. Once again, if you graph this top equation, it's already graphed for you. The x minus y equals -4, it's right here. So if you draw that line, which it's already graphed for you, and then if you graph the other one in blue, it's up here, which is the same exact line. So those lines land perfectly on top of each other. That's why it's called a consistent dependent. If you get confused, look at the wall. So once again, let me repeat, the first three questions is classifying. There's only pretty much three options. It's consistent independent. That's if you have one single answer. Maybe consistent dependent. That's if you have an infinite amount of answers. In other words, if the lines land on top of each other. And the third option, inconsistent. That means that they're parallel, they do not cross. So once again, the first three questions on your quiz today will come from looking at the graphs and determining if it's a consistent independent, consistent dependent, or maybe just inconsistent if they're parallel. Let's look at the next three questions. Questions 4, 5, and 6 are going to be on solving the system by graphing. And again, they come from the homework, but let me tell you this, I'm not going to actually ask you to graph like on number 9 right here. I mean, you're supposed to know how to do this, to graph it and then find the point of intersection. But for the sake of making it quicker on today's quiz, I'm just going to give you some systems, and I'm going to give you this graph that shows the equations, and then you could just look at the answer from there. So for example, we just did this one. That was a consistent dependent system. That was classifying it. But if I asked you to solve it, maybe number 4 is to solve this exact system. If I asked you to solve it and you see that it's the same line, then you would say infinitely many solutions. But let's take a look at another one here. So let's say I told you to solve number 1. Okay, remember, not classify, but let's just say I told you to solve number 1. So you don't even have to graph it because it's already graphed for you. So let's look for this top equation. I want to do it in green. I want to identify it with the green color. Y equals x minus 1. If we look for it over here, y equals x minus 1, that is right here, y equals x minus 1. So it's this line. Let me color it in green. Okay. And let's look at the other equation. Let's do the other equation in yellow. It says y equals -x plus 1. So where's y equals -x plus 1? That is right here, y equals -x plus 1, which is this line right here. So if I tell you to solve by graphing, it's already graphed for you. So what is the answer? It's the point of intersection. All you have to do is find that point of intersection and give its location. Now the 0, this is the origin, and if you want to get to this red dot, this point of intersection, you have to go to the right on the x. So that's +1. That's 1 unit on the x and 0 on the y. Y is up and down, and you're not going up or down from this point. So from the origin, you only go 1 unit on the x. So what does that mean? That the answer is 1 unit on the x, 0 units on the y. So it's the coordinate 1, 0. So if I asked you to solve this equation right here, this system of equations, the answer would be 1, 0. So the questions 4, 5, and 6 are going to be like this, where you just look at the graph and identify what your point of intersection is. Of course, if you have time at the end of the quiz, just plug it in and double check and see if it works. Plug in the 1 for x, 1 take away 1 is 0. And if you plug in the 0 for y, it'll say 0 equals 0, which is a true statement. Same thing here, 1, put a 1 right there, it's negative 1. Negative 1 plus 1, it is 0. And plug in the 0 for y, 0 does equal 0. So you'll see that you double checked it. Check, check, it works. This is your answer, guaranteed. That's when I ask you to solve. If they were to ask us to classify, which are the first 3 questions, that would be consistent independent. But questions 4, 5, and 6, I'm actually going to ask you to solve, and it's just a question of looking at the lines and seeing where they intersect. Okay. Anyhow, let's look at the next set of questions on the quiz. So questions 7, 8, 9, and 10. 4 questions are going to be on substitution, where I actually give you a system and you have to solve that system with substitution, showing all your work. And these are the final 4 questions that we're going to have. It's only a 10-question quiz. So let's just take a look at number 7 here. This is straight from our homework. This was already explained on the other video, but I just want to show you one more example, or the same example again. So step 1 on doing substitution is to pick an equation and get a letter to solve. In other words, to get a letter by itself. So obviously, if you pick this equation to get x by itself, it takes 2 steps. It takes many steps, right? If you pick this x to get by itself, then that's only 1 step. All you have to do is take away 2y. So step 1 would be to pick the top equation, it's the quickest route, and subtract the 2y, okay? Subtract 2y. So your new top equation becomes x equals negative 2y plus 13. That was step 1 on substitution. Step 2 is to take that variable expression, that x equals, and plug it into the equation you have not used, to the other equation, the one on the bottom. And obviously you're going to plug it into the x, not into the y, because this is x after all. Anyhow, we have negative 2 times x, but notice I put parentheses instead of x, minus 3y equals negative 18. And let me actually plug in the negative 2y plus 13 right in there. And now it's just a question of solving the equation by doing distributive property and combining like terms. So let me distribute. This is the reason why we put it in parentheses, right? You have to distribute most of the time. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, and of course there's a y right there. Negative 2 times 13, that is negative 26. Bring down the minus 3y, bring down the equals the negative 18. Combine like terms now. So if you combine the 4y minus 3y, that's going to be simply 1y. You don't even need the 1 in front of there, actually. And let's just rewrite the rest. We're going to have a minus 26 equals negative 18. Final step would be to get rid of that minus 26 by adding 26. Adding 26. Whoops, that's ugly, sorry. Anyhow, your answer is y equals negative 18 plus 26 is 8. So you have one answer. Keep in mind that in order for you to have the complete answer to any system, most of the time it has to be a coordinate x and y. So far we just have the y, which is 8. Now let's find the x. Anytime you have one letter and you need the other, simply plug it into any equation and solve for the other letter. So again, you could pick, this is the final step here, where you take your answer, plug it back into any equation you want from the original system. I want to go with the top one. The numbers are smaller, it looks a little easier. So I'm going to plug in y. My y equals 8, so I'm going to plug in y right in there. Let me rewrite the whole thing. It's going to be x plus 2 times y equals 13. So that's going to be an 8 that I plug in. So my equation is really going to become x plus 16 equals 13. And then I subtract 16 on both sides, and I end up with x equals negative 3. So now I have my x and my y. So on my answer column on the quiz, you are going to write it as negative 3 comma 8. That is your answer, negative 3 comma 8. So there's going to be 4 of these guys. Now keep in mind, let's say you're working out substitution method, and let's say you're working on an equation and you end up with something impossible, right? Like let's say you're working on an equation. Let me go to the side here. So let's say you're working on an equation, you end up with like, let's say x minus 3 equals x plus 5, and then you, let's say you're solving, you subtract x, it cancels, subtract x, it cancels. You end up with something impossible like this, negative 3 equals 5. That's where you say no solution, okay? But then again, let's say you're working on something, let's say you're working on substitution method like x minus 3 equals x minus 3, and you're solving this thing. You go minus x, cancels, cancels. You end up with something that's always true. Then that's not no solution. This is infinitely many solutions. So that's the whole entire quiz explained to you right now, right before the quiz.